Alright everybody, welcome to our first tutorial video for DAT 108. This is for the first page of our assignments for week 1. To get to all the assets you might need for our assignments for this whole semester, this is how this is going to work. You go to Blackboard, go to the class Digital Imaging 1, which is DAT 108. You'll be brought to the announcements page, and everything you'll ever need is under assignments. And if we go there, it says week 1, which is the week we just had, and it'll list 3 things: lines, birdcage, and tangrams. So there were 3 different worksheets for this week. That might change. There might be 2, there might be 4. Depends on what we're doing. So you click on that week, and eventually, there we go, you'll see the 3 different pages. They're in their own folders. We'll see why in a second. And then a link to Adobe TV, which can have some help videos if you need them. And then week 1 submission. This is where you're going to put everything when you're done. So, lines 1 in Illustrator, that's what this tutorial deals with. If I go to that folder, lines exercise is the actual file. If you click on it, it will eventually in a second start a download. Theoretically, maybe not. If it says it doesn't start shortly, click here. There we go. So we'll do that, and it will download a .ai file. Everything we're doing right now is in Illustrator. So usually you can just click on that, and it will open up in Illustrator. I'm going to do that for a second. Also in here are specific help PDFs and links to getting started with Illustrator. So with each assignment are the specific help items you can use for that specific page. But I just want to go over what is on this page that you will need to do, because it's not, this was a sort of a work time thing that we did in class, and I walked people through it. So this is just getting over the very small minutia of Illustrator, assuming that everyone is starting just from a point of being in DAT 101 and nothing else. If you've been in more, great, but you're going to have to do this anyways. So there's 2 different layers. Bottom layer is locked because it's all the stuff that's written down here. We don't want to be able to touch that. And then the top layer is where you're going to work. So one thing I expect everyone to do right from the get-go is get used to labeling your layers. So for example, I named the bottom one type. I just double click on it to rename it. And I name the top one, I'll just call it lines, because most of what we're drawing is lines. So the top portion right here, it says 1-inch line, and it's 1 point. Then it asks you for a 3-inch line that's 2 points wide. So you would use your line segment tool, and you will draw a line that's 3 inches long and 2 points wide, or 2.5 inches long and 3 points wide, etc., etc., etc. Now, you can set up how many points it's going to be before you draw it. And if you want the line to be perfectly horizontal, you hold down Shift. And what this does is it constrains the directions. So you can only draw horizontally, vertically, or I believe on a 45-degree angle. Yep. Control Z is undo. Learn that hotkey. You will love it. So I go back to my selection tool, which is V on the keyboard, or I click here to select it, and I would be able to change the point size afterwards if I needed to. But if I go along my properties at the top here, one of the other ones is width. And I can click up and get it to 3 inches. And I was pretty close. I was able to get pretty close because I know this grid, the big darker lines, are an inch apart. This is a inches grid with 1/8 inches for the light marks, right? So your other lines that you would draw, again, you can set up how many strokes they need to be beforehand, and then draw out the length that it asks for. One of the other things you can do is when you're drawing, you see that tooltip that says the D is equal to blah, a certain amount of inches. So you can get pretty close to what you need. Getting it right on the money can be hard. Like for whatever reason, this one is not landing on 2.5, it's landing on 2.51. But you can at least get close and then move on from there. So that's what I'm expecting for this top part, is to simply have the lines the way they are asked for. Part 2. Again, dealing with lines, I can just draw out a couple simple lines. Because this is Illustrator, I can always select multiple items, change their properties for those items. These are asking for different ends on them. There's, besides the size setting over here for stroke, you can also click on the word. And there's a lot of different options, including the end caps, which, wrong one, for example, can, why did that do that? Sometimes it's really picky about how you click on things to select them. There we go. So you can have flat edges or rounded edges. The the difference between the but and the projecting, and you can tell which one is which because you hover over and they tell you, is that this one, the path, let me unlock this layer for a second. The path goes all the way to the edge, right? You can see that the line, the actual visual of the line, ends at the path. On this one, it doesn't. You can see that the visual of where the line is goes beyond the path. There's reasons to use one or the other. I usually stick either with rounded or but because that's what I need. We're going to skip this for a second. This right here, this line, not on the locked layer because I want you guys to get used to copying and pasting. Especially in this program, everything is modular. If I go over to my layers, you can see that everything is kept separate. I could relabel these if I wanted to. I don't want to, and you don't have to. But what I can do is instead of drawing a new line when it's asking for 7 points, 8 points, 9 points, I can select this one, bring it up to 7 because that's what was asked for. And then I can do Control C to copy. Now if I do Control V, it throws the new one kind of into the center of the page. I don't want that. But Control Shift V puts it in exactly the same spot, which means then when I click on it and I hold down Shift to slide it, you can see that they're now perfectly in alignment with each other. Rather than this over here where I got sloppy and I don't know if these things are lined up, these things will be perfectly lined up. And again, Control Shift V, a new one gets put exactly on top of the old one. I click first as if to move it, which can move it anywhere I want, or if I hold down Shift, you'll see it snaps. It'll snap to either 0 or vertical, horizontal, or 45-degree angle. So that way I can get things to distribute nicely and evenly. This is a program that because the computer is drawing and dictating how things are drawn, sometimes you need that perfection because it'll be very noticeable when you don't have it. And once I start to copy some of these out, I can easily just select one at a time, bring it up to 8 points, 9 points, etc. I said before that I was a little bit sloppy with these. I just kind of put them, wherever. Well, you can actually line things up pretty easily. I'm going to unlock the bottom layer just to make sure it's noticing them. And you'll see that as soon as I drag this down, I get that green line. It says intersect. What that's saying is these things are now lined up. If I drag it over here, it'll line the middle up with the middle of that line, or a little bit further, it's lining the edge of the line up with the edge of something else. And it's got you can see as I'm dragging it that the green lines are appearing all over the place. That's because there's so many different things to line up with. So you can easily line things up horizontal or vertically. Even if you mess them up, I can move this over here. I can get it back to where it needs to go pretty easily. That's what those other tooltips are for. They're telling you how things line up with each other. Next up, joints. Just as you can have different ends on things, you can have different types of joints. There's 3 different ones. In order to do that, though, we need something with a bend in it. So I'm going to use the pen tool. The pen tool, you do not draw with it like a brush tool. What you do is you click here once, and then if I hold down Shift, it'll constrain directions, so I can click here again. And then I can change directions, and you can see the preview line that's right there, and draw that. And then you can see it's about to draw another line, so I'm going to hit Enter, and that will end that. But I'll still be in the same tool, so if I wanted to draw another one here, I could. Otherwise, I can go back to my Move tool. All right, so, and for right now, just stick with click, click, click in order to draw with the pen. There's other uses for the pen tool. We'll get to that later. So again, under stroke, I can say, I can click the word, which gives me my options. And instead of caps, we're looking at corners. Now a miter joint, which you see here, this is going straight to the edge. Think building. Miter joints are a building woodworking term. But I can go to a rounded corner. Or I can tell this one to be beveled. And the difference is obvious, right? Now, know that the computer is determining how rounded this is and how beveled this is, and there's no easy way to change that when you're dealing with strokes. So if you're looking to, say, like, make something that looks like a frame on the outside of something, and you need more of a bevel, or you want to bevel the inside, or all these things, you're really better off not using a path. You're better off building a shape that looks like this really thick path, because really, if you look at it, there's only the one path line being drawn through the middle, that right there. And then all the other information is being designed by the computer. So same with this one, same with this. Well, yeah, unlock this here. Same with that one. So if you want to have more control over it, you need to make it a shape and have a path that goes along the outside. We'll deal with shapes more next time. We're dealing with lines this week. You'll also notice I'm zooming way in. Don't be afraid to zoom into your work. Control plus zooms in, Control minus zooms out. All right. Next up, lines, dashed lines. So again, this is the computer generating things. I'm going to use my line tool, and I'm just going to draw a line. And I'm going to turn that down just a little bit because dashed lines look silly when they're that thick. Go to my selection tool. You always have to go back to your selection tool. If you stay on these drawing tools, which are this section right here, everything in here is like a creation tool. If you stay on those, you can't move anything. You're just going to keep creating. But if I click on the word stroke, you can see that it says dashed line. And if I click on that, the default is 12 points. And you can see that's exactly what we have here. It's offset a little bit. There we go. If I change it back to this setting, you can see there's two different settings for how to make it around a corner. But if we look at the instructions, it's actually asking for dash 6 points, gap 2 points. So if I go back to my settings, you'll see here you can actually say how big you want that to be. And it always goes dash and then the gap and then the dash and then the gap. You don't have to write the 6 pt, 2 pt, just put the numbers in and it knows you're dealing with points. There we go. So you can design different looking dashed lines. There we go. With different numbers. I'm going to skip that next one and go to the ones that see dash 12 gap 2 dash 2 gap 2 because you have up to 3 different sets of dashes and gaps that you can work with. So 12, 2, 2, 2, nope, not 22. There we go. You can see it writes the point in for me. And it makes a more complex line. So you can have dashes that are 2 different sizes. Right? So if you're drawing a road and you want lines going down the center, or a map that, Indiana Jones style, like we're traveling here, you can use these kinds of things, right? And this can be over a curved line. It doesn't just have to be a straight line. All right, so you'll want to fill in all of those. Next up, this one's a little bit weird. All of these things right here, the 1/8 spacing, 1/4 spacing, and pen tool, line, snap to grid are all in their one thing. So it's saying it wants to show you how snapping to the grid works. Well, we have to turn that on. View, snap to grid. And I'm going to turn on something else that for you guys is probably already turned on, snap to point. There we go. And so what we've done now is whenever we draw something, it's going to snap to this grid. And so I'm going to use my pen tool and I'm just going to click, and as I'm dragging along, you're going to feel this more than see it on my video. When you do this, you're going to notice. No matter where my pen is in between the grid lines, that edge of where it ends up is snapping to where there's a grid cross section, right? And I have to turn all the dashed lines off. There we go. Does that sometimes. There we go. So this is me setting up a basic horizontal line, and then I'm going to do all of these different spacings with some vertical lines. And I'm going to use the pen tool, and this is why. What I showed everyone in class is that I want you to get used to the idea of click and then click to draw a line, hit enter, you stay in the same pen tool, and you can draw multiple lines pretty quickly. Click, click, enter. I just do 4 lines in half a second. The spacing refers to how far apart to keep them, right? This grid is the bigger grid is inches, and then the smaller, the lighter colors are eighths of an inch. So 1/8 inch spacing means only 1 square apart. 1/4 inch spacing means 2 squares apart. And the reason I know this is there's two reasons. One is the rulers came up; they're automatically turned on with this file, and you can see that it says 1 and then 1/2 an inch to 2, 1/2 inch to 3. If you really look closely, you can count 8 boxes. If you would rather not look closely, and if you would rather confirm what the grid spacing is, Edit, Preferences, Guide and Grid. There's a lot of preferences in here. We'll be going over them throughout this semester. And under Grid, it says grid line every 1 inch. Subdivisions, 8. So 1/8 of an inch. If you wanted 1/16 of an inch, you could say subdivision 16. And you can also change the color of the grid, which I think should change the color of the lighter grid. Yeah, it brings up, if you make the grid lines darker, the subdivisions get a little bit darker. So this might make things a little bit easier to see. All right, but if 1 box is 1/8 and 2 boxes is 1/4, then 3 boxes is 3/8. And 4 boxes, no, just kidding. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. 4 boxes is 1/2. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you're getting used to using the pen tool sequentially without going back to your move tool every time, and you're getting used to using the grid. Next one down, rectangles, pretty simple. All right, you can make them rectangular, you can make them square. Ooh, I'm going to turn off snap to grid because that's going to kind of get in the way. There we go. If you don't have snap to grid on, getting a square can be very hard. So hold down shift and it constrains the proportions. So shift doesn't just constrain direction. Sometimes it constrains proportions. And I think it's drawing them all with beveled edges, which is making them look rounded, which we don't want. So I'm selecting all 3 of them, going to stroke and saying miter cap or miter corner instead of beveled edges. There we go. That's what we want. Now, this round joint and beveled joint is very different from a rounded triangle, or I'm sorry, rounded rectangle. So if I draw a rectangle, there we go. I go back to my move tool. See these little dots? There's 1 in each corner. If I pull these, what this is doing is it's actually changing the path. Even if it's just a little bit, like I'm going to bring this, there we go. So I'm kind of making this look like this. It's a little bit more rounded than that. But if I zoom way in, you can see that the path is actually altered. There's a curve in the path. If I go up here and look at the round joint, that's a straight path. And the inside is not curved. So these are 2 very, very different things, rounding the edges versus actually having a rounded path. There is a rounded rectangle tool, which just rounds the edges by default. But, it's got different settings than the regular rectangle tool, which is why that one looks crazy. There we go. But you can always unround it a little bit or entirely. If you bring this all the way up to the edge and it says R equals 0 inches, it is now just a not rounded rectangle, except that this is set to round. There we go. All right, so you can always go back and forth between one and the other. I can make this a nicely rounded square if I wanted to. If I bring it, I'm going to do this with a rectangle here. If you bring this in as much as you can, it only goes as far as rounding the shorter side into a half circle. Can't go beyond that. So it'll always keep this line straight. All right. So just make yourself a few, straight edges and a few not straight edge rectangles there. And don't do what I did because we need this room. So all these numbers that have no instructions next to them, they are referring to the polygon tool. The polygon tool is if you click on the rectangle tool and hold down, you get the other tools, including the polygon tool. Now if I click and drag, but don't let go, you can see a preview of what the shape will look like. And the default, I believe, is the hexagon. But I don't want a hexagon. There's a number 3 there, which means I want a triangle. Hit down on the down arrow key on your keyboard. 1, 2, there we go. And now I have a 3-sided object. But I can't really get it to be straight, and if I draw it like this, everything's kind of can be cockeyed sometimes. So what I'm going to do is hold down Shift. And if I do that, it will constrain it so that the direction is one that is helpful. You know, the bottom is flat. And I can bring the tool back up. If I press up on the keyboard, it goes up a number. And again, if I go back to the tool, which does not have a hotkey, I don't think. That's a disappointment. I kind of wish it did. But every time you hit up on the keyboard, you're going to get one more side to your object. And we just keep going back. And we just keep going and going all the way up until we get all the numbers. Now, I like to have things look a little bit more even than this. This looks crummy, right? These are all different. So I'm going to grab a guide. I'm going to make a guide by clicking on the ruler and dragging down. I drag it down to there. So these are all going to be like 3/8 of an inch tall. And I'm going to resize them so that they all end there. So that becomes a little bit more similar looking. There we go. I can also line them up along the bottom a little bit better than I did. I'm not looking for perfection, but it would be nice if you showed a little bit of control over what you're drawing by lining them up nicely. Because that's one thing you're going to have to get used to, whether it's in this program or Photoshop or anywhere else. Details matter. I'm going to line them up over the numbers by looking at that center box and, just kind of making them look a little bit nicer. All right, so that's how you create a guide. If you want to move the guide, you can go to Guides, turn off Lock Guides. You can clear them. You can hide them temporarily. I don't want to look at them now, but I want to get them back later. That kind of thing. All right, the last exercise on this, I'm going to go back to my rectangle tool. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to go to my selection tool. I'm going to click on the rectangle that's already there, and we're just going to copy and paste it across eventually. But this is referring to the fill. Everything we've done so far is transparent. You can see the grid through the middle. But I want this to have a color to it, so I'm going to double click on the fill. Right now there's a red line, which means none. If I double click on it, I get my color picker. We're going to talk a lot more about this color picker in the coming weeks, but quick overview. The color of the color. Is it red? Is it green? Is it blue? Is it purple? The top of this is how light it is, or the lightest it can be versus the darkest it can be. We're dealing in print right now, which means no black ink, all black ink. This whole bottom is all black. There's no different shades of it. It's just 100%, black. And then left to right is highly saturated color, zero saturated color. Zero saturation in color means grayscale. There is no color. It's black and white. And what we're going to do is I want to zero these all out. So I'm just going to click all the way to the top. And I'm going to go to the K, and instead of 0%, I'm going to say 10% because that's what it's asking for. And what that's going to do is that's going to make it a light color gray. It switches to blue here. I don't know why. there's no blue. Maybe I just click somewhere. And I hit OK, and it does that. So now I can do Control C for copy, Control Shift V for paste, and then I can move it, and I can double click on that, and instead of K 0%, I can say 20%. All right, and you can kind of continue on like that until you get all of them. Okay. What? No, not 300. That doesn't make any sense. There we go. So on and so forth. So you should have a nice grayscale bar there, right? We just want to see how that you can get control of the grayscale. And last but not least, You need to put your name here. In order to do that, you have to unlock the top layer because I didn't think to move it away from there. But if I double click on it, I can then change it. So your last name is more important to me than your first name. I have duplicate first names, so last name would be good. Today's date, which is, I think that. Name is the most important part. Your name has to be on here. When I get these from Blackboard, I don't see your name on them. All right, Control S to save, which I frankly should have pushed a long time ago. I shouldn't just save at the end. I should save as I'm going. All right, and then that means this file now exists, I believe, somewhere in my download folder. Yep, it's this one right here. And I know that because it's 2:01 p.m. and that's when I just saved it. Now, another thing you can do that would really help me out, if I go back to that file, if you click on something when it's already selected in Windows, you can change the name of it there. And if you change the name of your file to include your name, that helps me tremendously. It allows me to look at your files when I download them and know who's who just by seeing the file name. And it just helps me out a lot. So absolute requirement that your name is in here, but it's also very helpful if you make your name on the file. All right, so that's the overview of the first assignment, or the first part of the first assignment. The other two videos are forthcoming.